I feel like I'm speechless because if I'm not speechless, I'm just gonna scream the whole time. We are back in my office chair today because I have a lecture. Context. I very rarely read books that I dislike, and that is due to my laborious, kind of boring sometimes, but ultimately helpful for me, book selection process. I never just walk into a store and pick up something that seems interesting. And by never, I mean extremely rarely. I normally hold the book, read a little bit of it, take a picture on my phone, look it up on Goodreads, look it up on Thrift Books, and then 3 to 6 business days later, decide if I want to purchase it. And I did not do that with this book. I was casually browsing, it caught my eye, I flipped to some pages that had charts, I love a good chart, that had information that seemed to align with what I was already learning about pagan religions, nature-based religions. I specifically saw this page that talked about the Sabbats and the Witch's Wheel of the Year, and I thought, this looks like an accessible text of some introductory information into Wicca, into practicing magic. This will be just up my alley. It was a leap of faith, and faith steered me wrong. This book is called Witch, Unleashed, Untamed, Unapologetic by Lisa Lister. I bought it new. This happened somehow in the last few weeks, and I don't care because I am so close to throwing this into the trash. This is one of the worst books I have ever read for a variety of reasons. So we're just going to start at the very beginning when, frankly, I should have known better. Just so we're clear, I'm talking about this far in the beginning. I don't DNF books. Maybe I should, but something about having an opinion on something that you haven't finished really rubs me the wrong way, for me personally. So even though this page isn't even numbered, oh my gosh, it's the introduction. Even though from page Roman numeral 13, like before we get into numerics, I knew this book was not going to be for me, I finished the entire thing. Because that's how I like to spend my time. So, in the introduction, we have the author, Lisa Lister, say that she knows that she's being unapologetic, and that by being unapologetic, she runs the risk of pissing off traditional witches for not being witchy enough, pissing off pagans for not being inclusive of all possible paths, pissing off men for not addressing them as witches, and pissing off the transgender community for not addressing them either. Yet this is the work I do. I do women's work, and I'm definitely not going to apologize for that. So we have a TERF. We have a TERF witch here. I should have known they existed, but it's for some reason I never thought to combine those two ideologies. This woman spends this entire book referencing on multiple occasions uterus, womb, menstrual cycle, period. She is very, very wrapped up in this idea of womanhood being linked to and tied to female anatomy. And I hope I don't have to explain why this is so problematic to juxtapose the transgender community is going to be pissed because I don't talk to them, but I'm talking about women. Like this, we're off that J.K. Rowling flow, all right? We're not interested. And on top of that, as a cisgender woman who has the ability to bear children, as far as I know, who has a period very regularly, who has a uterus, who has all the working plumbing, I still found it jarring and uncomfortable to constantly being told to look at my femininity and my womanhood, therefore my power through my genitalia. Like, I don't need to be on the bus reading phrases like, this is me prodding your womb with my broomstick, or learning about embracing your power by being pussy to earth. I know that this woman, because I did some research on her, has, by her account, healed her own various lady part issues, just calling them lady parts as if women are the ones that have them. I'm using her words, I'm sorry. Her own genital issues and menstrual issues through the practice of Wicca. And I'm suspicious of spiritual healing, regardless of the religion it comes from. But I'm trying to be sensitive to this because this is not a belief system that I am a practicer of. I want to make it really clear. I'm criticizing this book and this individual woman, Lisa Lister's perspective on femininity and womanhood and where women get their power from and who counts as women, not the entire religion of Wicca as a whole. And I'm actually really glad that I've already read a couple books that directly contradict some of what she's saying, and align with some of what she's saying in terms of essential oils, in terms of certain practices for taking care of crystals, because I would hate for this to have been the first thing I read and then to go into this entire belief system with this idea that it was trans and non-binary exclusionary, and also that it was so focused on anatomy as being synonymous with gender. Moving away for one moment from her fixation with period blood, what started to bother me was when she talked about the various ways that she incorporates other deities and religious iconography and spiritual leaders into her practice. Now, context. From what I have read previous to this, witches who are part of a coven is actually more of a minority, at least in the United States. Most practicing witches are solitary or independent witches. Many of them identify as eclectic witches, which means they are drawing from different faith traditions. So I understand that there is a precedent for this kind of creation of your belief system, and that in and of itself doesn't bother me. What bothers me is when she makes passing reference to the fact that her practice includes the roots and bones of hoodoo, shamankas, Mayan medicine women, and Kali Ma as a coven sister witch. Nothing in this text leads me to believe that she has done the necessary research and personal work and, frankly, anthropological studies in some cases, or for these religions that originate in cultures and geographies that she's unfamiliar with, to understand what it means to just pull from other religions. For me, religion is almost all about context. What is the historical implications? What is the history of colonialization? How does culture and geography and society shape and intertwine with these religious symbols? It's so jarring to me throughout the book for her to just reference these various like African deities and indigenous spirits. And I'm like, how are you just picking and choosing from all these different cultures and religions based on whatever feels right to you? I mean, I spent 4 years studying religion. I'm about to spend another 2 more. And even with 6 years of official study, I do not have the background, I do not have the right, I do not have the necessary knowledge to fully understand all of the different cultural nuances, all of the different references, the ways in which femininity and masculinity and different cultures coalesce, the ways in which the fact that I am educated in a Western school of thought affects how I'm perceiving things that are I feel like I'm not explaining myself as clearly as I could be when it comes to why I'm so uncomfortable with her pulling from different belief systems, but there's just something that feels so privileged and entitled, especially, and anybody can do this, but especially coming from a white person, saying, I am going to take these different women, these different spiritual leaders, these different goddesses from African and Latinx and indigenous communities, rip them from their own context and say, I call upon them as my coven sister witches. Again, maybe she just didn't put it in the book, the basis for this type of behavior. Maybe she just didn't put it in the book, the time and energy and research she's put into understanding, appreciating, and respecting these other cultures. But when I just see one line, almost a throwaway line, about her controversial choice to call upon Mary Magdalene and Kali Ma, I'm just like, so you're aware that there may be something problematic about this. I mean, all throughout this book, she talks about the ideas of being unapologetic, about reclaiming your power, about rewriting your story. And I think on the surface level, that's actually really inspiring and helpful. But when you're using that as a cover for TERF behavior, for culture appropriation, then it's no longer as acceptable. And this whole pop psychology, pop feminism retelling of history, I also didn't appreciate. Yes, women throughout all of history have been persecuted for things such as being accused of being a witch, for having an independent mind, for being accused of cursing children or talking to animals. But when that is tied in, again, to an idea of womanhood that is solely rooted in your period and in your anatomy, it's so frustrating, because then we are completely erasing the history of transgender and non-binary, two-spirit, etc. people throughout the entire world. Like, when you're going to take a global perspective that now is a time for the unleashed, untamed, unapologetic woman to rise up because the world is crumbling and women need to reclaim their power, it is dangerous to say things like that and erase entire communities of people, especially, again, when you're pulling from certain traditions in which they did not have the Western idea of a gender binary, of a clear definition between man and woman. And I just find it so frustrating. I'm trying to be really mindful of the fact that I want to separate things like her writing style and the way she chooses quotes and the format and the blend between personal and practical information. Those things, I think, are more subjective. There are people who love this book, there are people that hate this book, and all of those things are referenced. But when it comes to the things I was talking about previously, I don't think that's subjective. Now, considering the way that our society treats the LGBTQ plus community, considering the way the society treats women who wear women who wear box braids at work, and white women who wear box braids at work, I know these things are still controversial, but that does not stop me from being my own untamed, unleashed, unapologetic self by acknowledging the fact that sometimes that rhetoric that she is spouting can be used to do just as much harm than just as much good when it comes to empowering women. Because what's the point of empowering women if you're only going to empower a certain type of woman? Another thing that frustrated me about this was that she is a hereditary witch, which means that she comes from a line of witches. She says her mother had the abilities and the gift, but chose to shun it, and she really learned about her innate power from her nana or her grandmother, which is lovely. And wasn't really that concerning to me until we got to the part in which she talked about her and her grandmother just being called to certain herbs and plants out in nature and using them to brew like tinctures and teas. It just seems so irresponsible to me that there is a book saying, hey, if you feel called to this mushroom or this grass and you have a history of women who practice this in your family, you'll be safe, you'll be fine. I'm not saying it's her fault if some 14-year-old goes out there and tries to like smoke something poisonous or put it in a tea, but it just seems like it places such an emphasis on the idea of being a hereditary witch and having that in your lineage, when I know within the community, again, just for my own independent research, some elitism involved in that about whether or not you have a lineage of that. And moving forward to the writing style, I mean, so many passages of this book read like personal journal entries, read like Facebook posts. They're interspersed with caps lock and italics, you know, liberal use of the enter key, quotes from other women. I mean, just here's an example of what the formatting looks like. And I don't know if we can focus that. And I understand for some people that might be easier to read. You know, it might be easier to chunk it up, to pull out quotes. She used an Ntozake Shange quote in here, and I was just like, ooh, girl, listen, I don't know. I would put money that this is not Shange's cup of tea, to be completely honest. But, you know, you're allowed to pull quotes from whoever. It just wove in and out, again, of like, here's an actual fact. I know we're talking about facts and religion, that can get complicated, but here's what the color red means, here's what these colors mean, here's how to cast a circle, here are spells that I've used, now let's talk about the moon. Like, it really felt like she wanted to write really a manifesto about her perspective on feminism and womanhood and history and the patriarchy and her story, not his story, and then was like, oh wait, I'm supposed to be talking about like Wicca as a whole, and then threw in a bunch of Wicca 101 stuff. I actually looked up some reviews of this book after I read it to see if I was completely out of line. And it's so interesting because the majority of the ones I've seen are like 4 stars, 5 stars, 4 stars, and like 1 or 2. I've seen very little in between. And for some women, it seems that it's very liberating to hear someone talk about owning something that can seem shameful, your period, owning something that girls are often nervous about, owning something that society has taught you is ugly, and the way that she weaves in this idea that all of us are witches, all of us are reclaiming our power. It's very, you know, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, every girl that can rise up will rise up. Love that show. It's very, very self-helpy. That's not it's not for me. It's really not for me. There are things about this book that I think are frankly objectively wrong. As I said, I feel like I'm trying to separate two different things. You know what I mean? Like on one hand, there are things that like this to me makes this book unacceptable, and other things like the writing style, the way she chooses to use metaphors. I still feel a little like traumatized from the idea of a witch's broom in my vagina. It for the whole time, it was just not a good time. And everything in here, with the exception of the spells she herself has created that she said were passed down from her family, everything in here that I would argue is directly related to like the practice of Wicca as a whole, what I was trying to learn about, I have since found in other books without all of the dangerous genitalia-centered rhetoric and ideas of, as long as you feel called to it, it's fine. Like, listen, I know what it feels like to be studying various religions and trying to figure out how each individual group thinks that they're 100% accurate and everybody else is destined for damnation in hell. I see the value in a person saying, question everything, question me, question this book, which is what she says. But I also think there is a kind of a flip side to that. If you're just picking and choosing whatever you find interesting and cool without any of the, like, to me, not knowing about the Talmud and just like picking stuff out of Kabbalah because it sounds interesting, like doesn't compute. Like it would make no sense for me if someone was like, oh yeah, like I really admire Esther from the Old Testament and they haven't read any other book in the Bible. Like these things are all intertwined and interconnected. And again, maybe she's done all of that. Maybe she has all that context and that research, but she never talks about it. Spends so much time on her husband and on period blood, does not talk about the ways in which she is learning about these various cultures and religions in a respectful way and to incorporate them into her own practice, besides the fact that she feels called to it. And again, just so much emphasis on things that I would argue do not define womanhood or make womanhood. I don't think there's anything wrong at all with a cisgender woman finding power in the idea that she can bear life. I don't think there's anything wrong with people who are using texts like this to learn how to love their period. And frankly, I did not think I was going to be someone to do rant reviews again because I read books I dislike so rarely, but this book really pissed me off. And what also pissed me off about it is that I'm nervous making this video because again, I am not a part of this community. I would feel much more comfortable tearing into some, pop culture feminist book using like Ruth and Esther and Hagar, because I come from a Christian tradition and that's where the majority of my schooling is from. And so I don't feel any hesitation about potentially saying or doing something that triggers a topic or may sound like a dog whistle to, again, anything like that for a community I'm not a part of. So I know I said I don't rate books, and I don't. So even though I desperately want to give this like 0 out of 5 stars, I'm just gonna say don't buy it. Do not buy it. There are other books that talk about femininity and womanhood and finding magic in your gender, if that's something that you're interested in. And there are so many other texts and free online resources that go into the, I would say, more academic parts of Wicca in particular. So I'll just have to do some research because I'm not trying to waste my money again or waste my time, even though I should have DNF'd it. I should have. Really, guys, there's so little value to this text. Y'all have fun making these? This wasn't fun. I'm like in a worse mood after talking about this book. Maybe it's because, maybe if I was doing a rant review on some like trashy airport romance that was like fun bad, it would be one thing. But talking about like TERFs and cultural appropriation, yeah, don't read this. Or do. Actually, if you do, like if me describing this is like, actually that sounds right up my alley, like please tag me in that video or like, I don't know, message me about it, because yeah, maybe me hearing about another person, like a human, like not reading a review when you have no emotional connection, maybe that would change my mind about some of this. But yeah, free marketing for a book I hated. Good night. Every time, Why?